Today's horror story is written by Cosmogoblin. Let me get something out of the way before I start. Time travel, as you've seen in the movies, is not possible. You can't step into a pod or drive a DeLorean and be instantly transported to the distant past or future. You're not going to be running from a T-Rex or rescuing Napoleon from St. Helena. As far as time travel is concerned, only one type is possible. The tachyonic anti-telephone, I'm afraid to say, does work. I know, because I built one. It was an accident. I was working on an anti-refractive material to increase the coherence of lasers to build a cubicle. You know what? It doesn't matter. Either you won't understand, or even worse, you will. I came here to warn against building one, not teach you how. During one of our tests, my grad student spotted a repeated pattern in the data. A millisecond burst of data, followed by the exact same sequence 4 seconds later. She thought it was an error in the recording electronics, so I took the data apart to find its source. I dearly wish she had been right. This supposed error was detrimental to our results, so it was important to clear it up before we could continue. Also, I had a couple of custom parts on order to improve the setup, so I had a few days to spend on analysis. The more I looked at the data, the more convinced I was that it was not a repetition or a copy. It was the exact same data, just twice. Impossible? So I had thought. I decided to try to replicate the test exactly as it was that day, but with a modification to the analysis software. This experiment, you see, generated a huge amount of data in a very short time, and the computer simply didn't have the speed to write all the data to disk, instead filtering it through pattern recognition before deciding which parts were important. On a hunch, I changed those filters to get more data on the second burst. I didn't really expect to see a repeat again, but I did. And even stranger, my hunch turned out to be right. The pattern was different this time, but again, repeated a few seconds later. The second pattern was a radio emission by the electronics, similar to the static you hear on a detuned radio. Nothing unusual about that, except the first pattern was that radio emission being picked up. I don't need to explain what a profound discovery this was. A Nobel Prize was the least of the accolades I would receive from this, even if it turned out to have no practical use. But my head was swimming with ideas. I was so excited I actually got dizzy and almost passed out. Not a great look for a 45-year-old academic. When I got hold of myself, I cordoned off the lab, putting no entry signs up and locking the door. I repeated the test dozens more times that night before going home to sleep, and every time I saw the same effect. This effect is called the tachyonic anti-telephone, though exactly what tachyons are is a job for particle physicists. The first thing I did over the next few weeks was to increase the delay between the received and sent signals. This turned out to be remarkably easy, and soon I could receive messages from hours in the future, as long as I didn't turn the device off. I did my best to fob my grad student off, getting her to work on an improved build for our original experiment, rather than touch the anti-telephone. In retrospect, keeping her in the dark was most certainly the right decision, though I didn't realize why. After that, I built a circuit to control the signals. Until now, they had just been static noise. Soon, I was able to send my own signal. I recorded and received signal, then decided on a signal to send. After I'd sent it, I compared sent with received, and they were always the same. I know what you're thinking. Of course I do. What if I decide not to send a signal? As far as I can tell, this is impossible. We live in a block universe where past and future are fixed, and what we call the present is just our current position in unchanging time. I started listening to the signals before sending them, but always ended up sending that same signal when the time came. Whether I was compelled by the laws of physics or psychology, I can't say, but I have always sent the same signal. I was wary of using the telephone for financial gain. Gambling on sports or the stock market seemed like asking for trouble, and I didn't want to call attention to myself at this stage. In the end, I did buy a lottery ticket, but only went for a £20,000 prize to help out with a few expenses. This also helped me to move the equipment. I was blocking off an entire room and other researchers were not happy. I moved the telephone to my home and my electricity bill went through the roof. At this point, I had learned how to tune the messages to arrive at an arbitrary time in the past, as long as the telephone had been turned on for the whole time. I added a few uninterruptible power supplies and kept it permanently turned on. The latest in a series of mistakes. In October 2019, I received a message from March 2020 warning me of the pandemic. This gave me plenty of time to stock up on food, sanitizers, and medical-grade face masks, spare parts for the telephone, a second broadband connection, and so on. While it's good to be prepared, I spent the next few months in deep worry. I knew I could do nothing to halt the spread of the virus, but what about my family? At Christmas, I tried to urge people to stock up, to be careful, to avoid social contact for the next few months, but they all thought I'd been reading too many paranoid blogs. I knew what was coming and could do nothing to help the people I loved. This, combined with my becoming a shut-in from January, sent me into quite a deep depression. It took me months to somewhat recover, but I did come up with a rule. I would continue to send messages about important events, but I would give as little detail as possible about the actual event and focus only on the practical aspects, what I can actually do. And this worked for a time. On August 23rd, a message told me not to go out on August 24th. I stayed in, and on August 25th, I read in the news an armed robbery had taken place at my local corner shop. In all likelihood, I would have not been in the shop at the time of the robbery, but still, I may have just saved my life. After reading the news article, I sent the message back 2 days. In November, a message read simply, "Go to your parents' house tomorrow." It's a 5-hour drive, so I had a great time catching up and stayed the night. The next morning, my mother fell ill. She died 3 days later. And I am eternally grateful that I got to spend that one last happy evening with her. I could recount many other ways in which my life was improved through the possession of my tachyonic anti-telephone. But in 2021, things started to go worse. I started breaking my rule. At first, it was little things. I'd send myself the results of parliamentary votes. I'd tell myself the weather for next week. Nothing of too much significance. I couldn't do anything to change these events, even if it would have broken the laws of physics. But why did I send these messages? Of course, I did send the messages after the fact. I had already received them, so I must have sent them. This bothered me, but not as much as what happened next. One morning, I awoke to find a received message. It said simply, "Kill." I'd never heard of this man, but a search on Facebook was all it took. He lived locally, just a few streets away. Why would I kill a man I'd never met? I'm not a killer. I've never even thrown a punch. I thought long and hard and eventually decided to ignore my instruction. The next week I read the news. CS had been arrested. He was the worst kind of criminal. I'll leave it up to imagination. But his last hateful act had been the day after I received that message. If I had obeyed myself, there would be one more innocent child in the world today. Partly due to predestination and partly due to my anger, I sent the message. As I'm sure you can imagine, this affected me deeply. I did nothing for days, and barely even got out of bed. But then I received another message. "Kill." This time, I didn't hesitate. The message roused me from my depression immediately. Looking him up, I found out he lived and worked 2 hours' drive away. If the last message was anything to go by, I had to act fast. How do you kill a person? And almost as importantly, how do you get away with it? He lived in a suburban area. I drove there in the daytime and scouted it out, finding few neighbors and no cameras on his street. So I waited. He came home in the dark. I decided to use a hammer and rely on surprise. I'll spare you the gory details, but I'm here, so you know how it went. I took his body to a forest and buried it there. For weeks, I scoured local and national news, waiting to find out what JL had done to deserve death. Nothing. A local paper mentioned he was missing, but described him as a well-loved family man who worked at a local garage. Whatever secrets he was hiding, it seemed wouldn't come out. The next was a woman. A microbiologist. This made more sense. Perhaps she was doing classified research on chemical warfare. What worked last time could work this time. It did. There have been 2 more since then. I don't understand why they had to die. Nothing has been revealed about them since their deaths. I haven't sent the messages yet. I've been waiting until I find out why. The last was in January 2022, but there have been other messages since then. A war has taken up most of the news recently. I knew about it 6 weeks before it started. I know the casualty figures. I know how it will end. I've sent some messages, but only for events that have already happened. But there's worse to come. Soon, very soon, an event will occur. I won't tell you what, but it's worse than anything you can imagine. Humanity will come to an end. Every last one of us. That message came 4 days ago. The end of everything described in agonizing detail. No person should know what I know. I can barely think straight, and it's taken me hours to get this out. I leave it as a warning. Do not research time travel. It will bring you nothing but grief. I will send this, and I will run. I received one last message this morning. The police have found the bodies and traced my car from traffic cameras. I am ready to flee with one question burning in my mind. If we are all dead, then who sent the message? Thank you for taking the time to listen. And sorry if these jokes are too tacky on. But you can handle another horror story, right?